Okay, so Radical Mindfulness, Thanksgiving weekend, and we are on page 135, starting towards the bottom of the page of chapter 6. And it's good to see everybody. Happy Thanksgiving. An interlude on the treatment of existential fear in Western feminism. While Gross is correct that basic anxiety is not a major concern within feminist debates today, this has not always been the case. Indeed, Simone de Beauvoir devoted much of volume 1 of The Second Sex to existential fear and how resentment powers the male will to supremacy. For Beauvoir, quote, woman inspires man with horror. It is the horror of his own carnal contingency, which he projects upon her, end quote. Women provide men with birth, but thus also condemn them to the finite and to death. Men cope with their existential fears and ambivalences by projecting and externalizing their own carnality and finitude onto women, who they seek to control as a way of fantastically gaining the upper hand on death itself. According to Beauvoir, this fruitless and infantile pursuit helps to shape patriarchal social relations. Beauvoir did not write extensively on Buddhism, but the first lines of her book on aging and ageism, The Coming of Age, begin with the story of the historical Buddha. She notes how the, quote, Buddha recognized his own fate in the person of a very aged man because, being born to save humanity, he chose to take upon himself the entirety of the human state. In this, he differed from the rest of mankind, for they evade those aspects of it that distress them. And above all, they avoid old age, end quote. There are resonances between Buddhist modernism and Beauvoir's existentialism that she herself recognized. Like Gross, Beauvoir thought patriarchy had multiple drivers, structural and existential. And the existential drivers were not incidental to her. In a fascinating 1979 interview with Jessica Benjamin and Margaret Simons, Benjamin asks Beauvoir, you say in The Second Sex that men resent women because women represent nature and mortality, and in that way they represent death, right? Beauvoir says yes. Benjamin continues, do you still believe that this has to do with the roots of the hatred of women? Beauvoir says no, but then she goes on to affirm her existential argument in The Second Sex, while clarifying that other drivers are operative too. Quote, but I think that one of the things, as revealed in their myths, that men detest about women is that men are born, and that consequently they are mortal. But this is only one thing, one of the myths, one of the hatreds. There are many other reasons for men's hatred of women, but this particular one certainly does exist. It exists for some men. There are quite a few who see in women the image of death itself. That's certain, end quote. Anita, just to let you know, we're midway through the page 136. In the interview, Beauvoir appears keen to avoid criticisms of reductionism and idealism, or an inattentiveness to material drivers of domination. But her response clarifies that she never disavowed her existential explanation for male supremacy. Indeed, later in the interview, when asked if she now rejects The Second Sex, Beauvoir pushes back. There are some old-fashioned statements in the book, she concedes, but I'm altogether in agreement with The Second Sex. And I'm going to pass it there because I think I have a dog that I'm going to need to tend to.
Well, Violetta, who just joined, we're on 136. In the interview, Beauvoir appears keen to avoid. Sorry, but I'm finishing that paragraph. But I'm altogether in agreement with The Second Sex. Given the centrality of Beauvoir's existential explanation for male supremacy in the second sex, it's surprising that this thread hasn't been more thoroughly pursued in subsequent feminist scholarship. Even the secondary literature on Beauvoir regularly sidesteps it. Some of these same authors pathologize Beauvoir's interest in finitude without substantively engaging with her arguments about it. For Elaine Marx, all her themes and elaborations are pretexts for the endless wrestling with her own mortality, of which she's acutely aware, but which she has no means, emotional or intellectual, of confronting without hysteria or ideology. Likewise, writing about the second sex, Toril Moy argues that Beauvoir's obsessional imagery of womb-like darkness and destruction has less to do with the requirements of her argument than with the intensity of her own personal obsession with annihilation, emptiness, and death. That critics habitually pathologize Beauvoir's meditations on death without engaging deeply with the substance of her arguments suggests to me that they are succumbing to the very evasions they project onto Beauvoir. A recurring theme of this book is that Euro-Americas is a death-denying project. It is thus not entirely surprising that Beauvoir's arguments about death, fear, and compensatory attachments to male supremacy have been largely buried, even by those sympathetic to her general project. One important exception is the work of Dorothy Dinnerstein. Rita Gross engages significantly with Dinnerstein's best-known work, The Mermaid and the Minotaur, calling it, quote, directly relevant to Buddhism. While acknowledged as an important work in the formation of psychoanalytic feminism, Dinnerstein's existential account of male supremacy has had uneven uptake. Published in 1976, The Mermaid and the Minotaur went out of print until it was reissued in 1999 and 2021 with a foreword by Gloria Steinem. Like with Trungpa, Gross, and the Buddha himself, Dinnerstein's liberation project is incomplete. In a sympathetic 2002 Signs essay, fellow psychoanalytic feminist Jane Flax challenged Dinnerstein for her lack of an intersectional lens, particularly for her heteronormativity, inattentiveness to race, and general tendency to flatten difference with an over-reliance on universal claims. These same criticisms are also applicable to Gross, and because Dinnerstein's The Mermaid and the Minotaur is the most sustained account of how basic anxiety shapes patriarchal social relations outside of Buddhist feminism, Dinnerstein's text deserves attention despite its limitations. Building from Beauvoir and psychoanalytic thinkers in the lineage of Melanie Klein, Dinnerstein's argument begins with the same primary experiences of existential fear and incapacities that were outlined by Trungpa in his teachings on the Four Noble Truths. Unlike Trungpa, however, Dinnerstein is particularly attuned to the relational and gendered effects of this anxiety. She describes the human infant as a helpless, immobile being for whom the swing between limitless anxiety and total bliss depends on outside succor. Because of our primary dependence on caregivers who are a bulwark against chaos, we develop ambivalent feelings toward them. We need adult caregivers to protect against basic anxiety, but they don't always deliver and can sometimes even intensify our bewilderments. Our caregivers can start to feel like emissaries from the very chaos we crave autonomy from. And of course, in patriarchal societies, it is women who do the primary caregiving. For Dinnerstein, women under patriarchy are the helpless child's main contact with the natural surround, the center of everything the infant wants and feels drawn to, fears losing, and feels threatened by. In sum, felt anxieties and ambivalences towards our existential condition are projected onto women. They become scapegoats for human resentment of the human condition. Male supremacy and patriarchal social relations are fueled, according to Dinnerstein, by an infantile wish to see women brought to heel as a fantastical way to bring the powers of life and death under control. The recent overturning of Roe v. Wade by the U.S. Supreme Court and the subsequent radical restriction of abortion rights is one recent example. I'll just stop there because there was a lot there, but is Dinnerstein's argument clear enough to be able to proceed? I don't know how much more back and forth thing. I mean, it seems at least for the next 2 pages, he's building on what this argument is. So I just wanted to make sure that there is a general sense of it. Well, everyone says yes. Everyone understands Dinnerstein's argument. The Minotaur and the Mermaid, ho!
I'm pausing for more. There's parts that I'm like, yeah, I see it, and there's other parts that unless
Totally. But it just that seemed to be a place where we could ask questions for like, hey, what's a mermaid? Or whatever the question is. Okay. Um, I myself have total understanding of the argument and where it's going. I'm way ahead of you. I'm not. Okay. Well, so while men generally benefit from male supremacy, Dinnerstein argues that women have their own existential attachments to it. Quote, man's dominion over what we think of as the world, writes Dinnerstein, rests on a terror that we all feel, the terror of sinking back wholly into the helplessness of infancy. Because we identify mothers with that helplessness and bewilderment, the paternal authority we encounter in the adult world, however disappointing, can still be experienced as a sanctuary from maternal authority. At the beginning of her book, Dinnerstein asks why people, regardless of their gender, continue consenting to patriarchal order despite its manifold failings. For her, the unresolved existential intensities we experience proverbially as infants provide one powerful answer. Quote, on an inarticulate level, then, both men and women use the unresolved early threat of female dominion to justify keeping the infantilism in themselves alive under male dominion. For Dinnerstein, these existential dynamics and the patriarchal social relations they fuel would change fundamentally if parenting duties were shared more equitably. Projecting existential fears and compensatory desires for control onto women would be less possible if men participated more actively in caregiving. With no clear scapegoat to project our fears onto, we'd be forced to face and metabolize our existential fears. For Dinnerstein, this would not only transform patriarchal social relations, but would make humans far less destructive of one another and the more than human world. Whether equitable parenting can transform gender relations and quell human destructiveness is an open question, but regardless of its deeper consequences, most women would welcome this development on the home front. While the parenting workload is differently distributed than when Mermaid was written, studies still show that even among couples that express desires for egalitarian households, women still carry more of the domestic and caregiving burden. Dinnerstein's work is central to Gross's Buddhist feminism. Gross mobilized Dinnerstein to help her theorize how primal experiences of what Trungpa calls basic anxiety are gendered in patriarchal societies where women do the majority of childcare. Dinnerstein's analysis clarifies how the compensatory ego attachments described in the Four Noble Truths can be laced with gendered power dynamics, deepening depending on the household division of labor. Likewise, Gross harnesses Dinnerstein's analysis to emphasize the importance of growing the number of women Buddhist teachers. She notes that women regularly preside over all the incidents of frustration and limitation that initiate us into the human condition and are subconsciously blamed for those inevitabilities in a way that men are not. Moreover, in many Buddhist traditions, it's predominantly men who are teachers and seen as emissaries of liberation, for they introduce us to spiritual disciplines and the possibility of freedom. In other words, suffering becomes aligned with women, whereas freedom is more aligned with men. For Gross, the other side of breaking out of the prison of gender roles involves not only men taking up their fair share of the responsibilities for infant and child care, but also women becoming competent and being able to take up the role of being a Buddhist teacher. In 2018, Descent Profile of Dinnerstein, on the 40-year anniversary of Mermaid, Charlotte Shane noted that there is so much the book does well that most feminist writing doesn't bother to do at all. More than merely being merely salvageable, its best components remain urgently relevant in spite of its flaws. And yet, as Jane Flax articulated in a 2002 critique, the flaws are plenty. Flax is sympathetic to the mermaid and the minotaur, but she struggles with Dinnerstein's tendency to treat the experiences of individual infants and mothers as universal. She thinks that Dinnerstein's interpretations of the inner lives of infants are just that, interpretations, and not generalizable claims. The wish for omnipotence, Flax writes, the wish for omnipotence is something contemporary. Western adults might imagine an infant would want as a reaction to its dependence and need. While this might be useful speculation about infantile life, it is not an empirical fact about the inner lives of infants. Dinnerstein's argument likely has more analytic purchase for the Euro-American cultures she's primarily in dialogue with, but it cannot be treated as universally applicable. Dinnerstein does acknowledge her subject position, noting how everyone's perspective is limited. Necessary coordination begins with that recognition. And yet, her text is populated with broad claims, such as the universal exploitation of women is rooted in our attitudes towards very early parental figures. This misses the relative gender equality experienced in pre-colonial Haudenosaunee societies. A more thoroughgoing acknowledgement of its limits would strengthen Dinnerstein's analysis. Flax is also critical of Dinnerstein's heteronormativity, her tendency to assume stable gender constructs of male and female, and then treat this dyad as an unexamined parenting norm. Queer people are parents, trans people are parents. How do these dynamics affect Dinnerstein's analysis? For Flax, Dinnerstein's inattention to the consequences of normative heterosexuality further constrains her inquiry. Flax makes similar claims about race. Dinnerstein tends to present the experiences of white women in North America as the experiences of all women, and yet, for Flax, the social and psychic meanings of maternity, femininity, and power are racially differentiated. She notes that in white imaginaries, both black female and black male bodies remain far more defined and constrained by fleshly existence than those marked white would imagine ourselves to be. Dinnerstein's expectations that the scapegoating of designated others for our existential disappointments will be curtailed by more equal parenting is curious. She does not attend to how projection can happen along multiple axes of power. Co-parenting might be an institutional reform that limits some gendered scapegoating, but it's easy to imagine a compensatory will to supremacy simply seeking other targets to help soothe existential disappointments. For Flax, one would have to exclude vast amounts of recent history to avoid the fact that race, religion, sexuality, and ethnicity are sites of equally intense feeling, fantasy, and social violence. Dinnerstein's existential account of male supremacy is insufficiently intersectional. The same can be said of Rita Gross's Buddhist feminism, an important critique made by her graduate student, Sao Lan Hu.
I do, there's a lot there to think about. I don't feel automatically on board with all of it. And certainly I'm thinking about the way that, women's bodies and nature, both the desire to have domination over them, and is it a response to the awareness of mortality? How does that show up? But I'm also thinking about the way, and Kat, I'd be interested, I don't know what Australian Aboriginal people's beliefs would have been, but if we go back far enough that so many gods are female deities, and as we start to have, as humankind starts to develop, having a sort of dominion over the external world, that we start to have this kind of hubris, perhaps. Is that in part where we begin to replace the female deities with male gods? That, I don't know if I'm being very articulate, but is that one of the things that we can track, that where we once are honoring and see ourselves as submitting to the feminine, and then do we decide that, well, actually, this, I did appreciate the line about how, women aligned with suffering and men aligned with freedom, that does the male god have something more to offer in a way? And, as we become more advanced as civilizations, do we not feel the threat of the feminine in the way we once did. And I'm speculating. I don't know that that's in any way true. Kat has added about Dinerstein that she was writing in the mid-70s. Family dynamics are very different now. When parents stay together, men are shouldering more of the parental burden. In Australia, I don't think it's as true in the US, nor in Canada. The breakdown of many families may have exacerbated her views, yes. And then Kat has also said that there is no single male or female bias across Australian Aboriginal cultures. Gender roles and authority vary by nation, with some societies emphasizing male leadership, others recognizing strong female roles, and many organizing social life around complementary gendered responsibilities rather than a strict hierarchy. Thank you for that. Karen, your hand was up. Was that on purpose? Okay. A few thoughts from me, and I have a dog that needs to go out, so I'm just going to mute myself.
Well, there's just one more section in this chapter, which, so if someone feels like reading, that's cool. But if no one wants to read, I'm willing to re-shoulder the burden, but I don't want to take that away from someone.
I'm happy to read, Matthew.
Oh, great. But Kelly, there's been a request to see the dog.
Yay.
Take it away, Anne. Make it happen.
Okie dokie. Intersectional Buddhist Feminism as Radical Mindfulness. In an essay titled The White Feminism and Rita Gross's Critique of Gender Identities and Reconstruction of Buddhism, Hu outlines the significant limitations of her mentor's liberation project. Mainly, despite a thoroughgoing critique of patriarchal social relations, Gross remained attached to narratives of white and Western supremacy. According to Hu, Gross's fierce dedication to dismantling binary gender identities can and should be extended to dismantling other forms of binary identities and the unreflective attachments to them, such as Western and Eastern, white and non-white, American and immigrant. Hu's own work, along that of other contemporary Buddhist feminists and engaged Buddhists, point toward an intersectional Buddhism that is exemplary of the radical mindfulness advocated here. As Hu notes, Gross justifies her singular focus on sexism with assertions that gender discrimination is more persistent than other oppressions. She calls gender the most serious blind spot of contemporary scholarship. She also argues that gender identity is more basic for most people than identification in terms of color, shape, or even culture, and is far more addictive. Compare this with Black Buddhist Jan Willis's observation that for most of her life, it seemed that the specter and concomitant hindrances of racism far outweighed those of sexism, even though, of course, the two worked very closely together. Gross, a white woman, was unwilling to look beyond her own experience and recognize the enduring power of white supremacy. As Hu observes about Gross's biography, the experience of growing up as a poor farm girl under patriarchy put her among the oppressed, and it did not seem to have registered with her that a person could be oppressed in some regards, such as being female and poor, and privileged in others, such as being white and born in the United States. Gross's theorizing was insufficiently intersectional, and for Hu, she was blocked from extending her work in this direction by her own defensive attachments to whiteness. She took critiques about her whiteness as personal attacks. Gross's liberation project was both politically and existentially limited. Another compensatory attachment that marred Gross's work was Western supremacy. Despite her appreciation of Buddhism, Gross thought Western feminism was needed to redeem it. The most powerful agent promoting post-patriarchal Buddhism, she writes in Buddhism After Patriarchy, is the auspicious coincidence of feminism and Buddhism in the West. This framing obscures and belittles the ongoing activism and organizing of Buddhist women in Asia. Likewise, according to Hu, Gross's account of Western Buddhism is decidedly white, thereby obscuring the contributions of Asian Americans. For Hu, Gross's vision of a post-patriarchal American Buddhism never included Asian American Buddhists. This fits a larger pattern within American Buddhism that Jane Iwamura calls Asian religions without Asians. Despite making up the majority of American Buddhists, people of Asian heritage are regularly obscured by accounts of Western Buddhism, such as Gross's, which present it as redemptive of the tradition. For Chenzing Han, white converts are the best Buddhists of all within this storyline, since they are
Ooh,
the ones who carry the torch of a new and improved, rational and modern, enlightened Western Buddhism.
it's Protestantism all over again.
Wow.
I think there are echoes of what we're experiencing right now with Thomas King and his admission that, in spite of being in his 80s and a best-selling author, writing about Indigenous things as somebody of Cherokee descent, and acknowledging just in the last month that he actually has no Indigenous heritage. And I'm thinking of Sherman Alexie's wonderful poem, How to Write the Great American
Indian novel.
Indian Novel. And that dominant culture wants all of those roles played by white people.
Yeah, I think there's a parallel run through yoga on all of this, for sure. Shall I continue?
I can read you that poem if you want.
Grand.
Yeah.
Pause for poetry.
It's
Okay.
worth it. It's fabulous and heartbreaking.
Yeah. I'll put it into the chat as well so you can have your own copy, but here it is. How to Write the Great American Indian Novel. All the Indians must have tragic features, tragic noses, eyes, and arms. Their hands and fingers must be tragic when they reach for tragic food. The hero must be a half-breed, half white and half Indian, preferably, from a horse culture. He should weep often, weep alone. That's mandatory. If the hero is an Indian woman, she is beautiful. She must be slender and in love with a white man. But if she loves an Indian man, then he must be a half-breed, preferably from a horse culture. If the Indian woman loves a white man, then he has to be so white that we can see the blue veins running through his skin like rivers. When the Indian woman steps out of her dress, the white man gasps at the endless beauty of her brown skin. She should be compared to nature: brown hills, mountains, fertile valleys, dewy grass, wind, clear water. If she's compared to murky water, however, she must then have a secret. Indians always have secrets, which are carefully and slowly revealed. Yet Indian secrets can be disclosed suddenly, like a storm. Indian men are, of course, storms. They should destroy the lives of any white women who choose to love them. All white women love Indian men. That is always the case. White women feign disgust at the savage in blue jeans and t-shirt, but secretly lust after him. White women dream about half-breed Indian men from horse cultures. Indian men are horses, smelling wild and gamey, while when the Indian man unbuttons his pants, the white woman should think of topsoil. There must be one murder, one suicide, one attempted rape. Alcohol should be consumed. Cars must be driven at high speeds. Indians must see visions. White people can have the same visions if they are in love with Indians. If a white person loves an Indian, then the white person is Indian by proximity. White people must carry an Indian deep inside themselves. Those interior Indians are half-breed and obviously from horse cultures. If the interior Indian is male, then he must be a warrior, especially if he's inside a white man. If the interior Indian is female, then she must be a healer, especially if she is inside a white woman. Sometimes there are complications. An Indian man can be hidden inside a white woman. An Indian woman can be hidden inside a white man. In these rare instances, everybody's a half-breed struggling to learn more about his or her own horse culture. There must be redemption, of course, and all sins must be forgiven. For this, we need children. A white child and an Indian child, gender not important, should express deep affection in a childlike way. In the great American Indian novel, when it's finally written, all the white people will be Indians, and all of the Indians will be ghosts. There's the poem. Not unrelated to what we're reading.
Mhm. Kat has added mainstream storytelling usually reduces all different types of repressed, suppressed, oppressed peoples as props for white narratives. That's exactly it. I think,
Yep.
the ghosting of other practices, traditions, cultures, and whether it's yoga or First Nations. Mm. I'm appreciating the comment that American Buddhism never included Asian American Buddhists.
Yep.
Because it's true, but I think I sort of don't notice, and the not noticing is part of like, oh, this is so normal, that it doesn't draw my attention, that the what's missing can so easily go without notice.
It's gross as enduring attachments, maybe? Is that it?
Yeah.
Gross's enduring attachments to whiteness and Western supremacy place significant limits on her liberation project, which itself sought to extend the liberation pursued by her Buddhist teachers, such as Chögyam Trungpa, for who the best way to honor Gross's groundbreaking scholarship on Buddhist feminism is to extend it further in intersectional directions. This is what Hu seeks to do in This Worldly Nibbana, the Buddhist feminist social ethic for peacemaking in the global community. Hu makes three key moves that push Buddhist feminism toward becoming a more genuinely collective liberation project. First, while acknowledging, along with Gross, that Buddhism has not always been historically oriented toward addressing power imbalances, Hu clarifies that the earliest Buddhist texts do offer support for these efforts. Hu doesn't claim that a justice-oriented Buddhism is the authentic Buddhism, since no such singular thing exists, only that there is considerable canonical support for it. Critical resources exist within the Buddhist world to cultivate more political engagement. This needn't keep Buddhists from engaging with other traditions for helpful reasons, but it does push back against Gross's assertion that Western feminism is best poised to redeem the tradition. Second, Hu offers a clear Buddhist account of how both existential and structural drivers shape injustices, and how both existential change strategies and more conventional collective actions, such as protest, are needed. Recall that Gross similarly deploys an explanatory pluralism in making sense of patriarchal social relations. And yet Gross uses phrases such as rock bottom and main cause that position existential drivers as primary. Drawing from the Buddhist doctrine of interdependent co-arising, Hu offers a strong explanation for why multiple drivers are always present, and why the existential cannot be privileged over the structural. Third, and most distinctly from Gross, who offers Buddhist analytical support for an intersectional politics attuned to how the compensatory will to supremacy can help shape power asymmetries along multiple axes. Anybody want to comment on those three?
One thing I'm thinking about is, with regards to Gross or any of us, perhaps there's the challenge or the problem of not being aware of positionality. And so for Gross as a white woman, seeing misogyny or the suppression of women as, oh, that's the thing. And so I certainly, I don't disagree that that might be the challenge, but I'm also thinking about it in terms of, oh, again, we're socialized towards thinking there is an answer, that there is the thing that will explain and like unlock the whole puzzle. And so I'm just thinking about that with a bit of compassion that, we've been trained up to think this way. And that there's not necessarily any malice or lack of charity as much as just habitual ways of perceiving the world. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good reminder. Returning to the first point, while Hu acknowledges that Buddhism has not always addressed itself to gender, race, or class injustices, the earliest Buddhist texts and the stories they contain about the original Buddhist Sangha show a community ultimately attuned to power asymmetries. Oh, I gotta get a pen. Sorry.
As Anne's doing that, Kat has added, multiple drivers are always present, and why the existential cannot be privileged over the structural. That's the quote. And Kat says, this highlighted for me that we have to initiate change at the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual levels. Yeah, the whole and the all.
Thank you. In the larger society, Hu writes, people's social and economic standing was determined by their roles in production and reproduction. In the Sangha, the male and female renunciates abstained from both production and reproduction, and therefore they were not defined or stratified as they would have been in the larger society. There were no caste lineages, no noble clan names, or lack thereof, and no privileges accompanying wealth. And for Hu, attentiveness to power extended into the original Buddhist teachings as well. There cannot be harmony when the belly is empty is a line from the Pali Canon that tracks how class asymmetries limit collective capacities for liberation. Early Buddhists were aware that concentrations of power shape society and responded to these conditions by targeting elites for conscientization or trying to get them to behave in a more conscientious and generous way. Classical Buddhism, according to Hu, recognized that those in power were responsible for the social structures that produced dukkha. While the strategy of conscientization can be rightfully criticized under contemporary conditions, when elites fight the most modest redistributions of wealth, the key point is that there is canonical support for Buddhism that targets concentrations of power as part of its praxis. In This Worldly Nibbana, Hu provides a nuanced Buddhist account of how structural and existential forces shape injustices. For her, all selves are processes interacting with and interconditioning one another in a web of coexistence. Each is reflecting and reflected by the actions of others, many of which have been sedimented as cultural norms and social structures. just as an aside, this is like the fourth time sedimented has been used like this. It's so interesting, but mostly by Rowe. That's interesting. While this formulation may make it sound like social conditions find their origins in the aggregated internal processes of multiple individuals, who clarifies that this is not her position. In the Buddhist overview of interdependent co-arising, who writes, society and individuals condition one another, and neither one is the uncreated creator of the other. What a line. Whose Buddhism places more emphasis on the political effects of existential anxiety than most varieties of feminism, but it also allows for a dynamic account of causation attentive to social structure. From a Buddhist point of view, writes Hu, a teaching or analysis that presumes only one cause for all existing problems or proposes only one measure as the solution to all problems is to be viewed with more suspicion than those that acknowledge the intricate interrelations among multiple causes and recommend multiple measures simultaneously. There you go, Kelly. The Buddhist doctrine of interdependent co-arising not only makes room for the multiple drivers of domination, but it can also encompass the overlapping oppressions experienced by groups, often termed intersectionality. In this worldly nibbana, Hu cites the famed statement from the Combahee River Collective, credited as a crucial activist precursor to intersectional theory. Members of the collective identified as Black feminists and wrote from their experience of being pressed by compounded oppressions along the axis of race, gender, class, and sexuality. The most general statement of our politics at the present time would be that we are actively committed to struggling against racial, sexual, heterosexual, and class oppression, and see as our particular task the development of integrated analysis and practice based upon the fact that the major systems of oppression are interlocking. The synthesis of these oppressions creates the conditions of our lives. Any thoughts?
What does her mean, HIR?
Right?
For her, HIR, it was mentioned a couple times.
It's like they or them. It's a non-binary. It's neither
I
him
see.
or her.
And that's like a
I
normal
thought it was.
English. Like,
I just looked it up because I was thinking, what is this?
yeah, because
I
I've
think
heard
it's
a lot of
interesting.
they, them, different, but her I haven't really heard, so sure.
So that might maybe how who self-identifies.
As non-binary.
Yeah, that's what I'm assuming.
Mhm. Mhm.
I thought it was interesting that. Well, yeah, I just looked it up and that's what it said. So
It's a very specific choice, right?
yeah,
Um,
Oh, it's pronounced differently.
but
is it
how is it pronounced?
hair?
Hair. Oh, thanks, guys.
Hair?
Neopronoun.
What did you say, Matthew?
It's a neopronoun.
Like a new pronoun, something that's happened recently? When you say neo?
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of constructed pronouns beyond uh, him, her, and they, and there's a whole bunch of other ones which are have been built for varying reasons for varying communities or individuals. Hair,
You know how
zir,
it
hair, zir are some of them. There are loads.
Do you know how it differs from they them? Does it just reduce the anxiety that people have of considering they them being plural?
It's singular. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's essentially the difference.
I, I couldn't tell you. There are lots of philosophies that go into this, and for some people, where there are pretty, I say this in the, it's like, oh wow, I've never heard of that one. There's a long list of which ones that people who are aromantic or who choose for varying reasons or put themselves deep in the spectrum of being able to be liberal with their language usage, so I don't keep close track of it. But hair and zir are at least ones that I've heard of.
We were just saying it was a very specific choice. I don't think you were here. Like it's
Yeah.
it's interesting that that just suddenly becomes the specific choice by the author.
Mhm.
Or by who?
Yeah, yeah. That's probably the author is reflecting their pronouns, their terminology.
It
Yeah, I appreciate the quote by who that, anything that presumes only one cause for all existing problems is, suspicious. And I have the felt sense of like, oh, but don't like we love it though when there's an answer, one answer. Um, so, again, just I'm noticing the conditioning in myself. And I'm also remembering when my daughter came home at age 13. So, I mean, that's more than it's a decade ago. But her coming home and saying, if you're not an intersectional feminist, you're automatically racist. And me trying to play it cool, but like realizing I don't know what an intersectional feminist is.
There's nothing like a 13-year-old girl.
Oh yeah. Well, I don't think I was having those conversations at 13, but yeah, I felt the dripping with judgment for sure.
If not that, something else for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Kat has added, scientific method has trained us to isolate variables and think there is only one variable that solves everything. Absolutely. Yeah, that I just looked up Doctor Who, and that's how they refer to themselves.
Yeah.
Z in air.
Yeah, definition of dukkha, that's on page 142, other than having to look in someone's book.
Are you looking for a definition of dukkha?
Well, yes. Well, I know what dukkha is, but I would like to see their definition of it. But it looks like in order to do that, I have to go to read who.
The footnote.
Yeah. Like there's no, like it's not a definition somewhere. I have to go to that page and who. Drat.
And will it be an Asian definition or a white definition?
Well, I'm curious about what
I
they.
know.
But this is, I mean, it's a very not controversial. It's a very wrestly translated word, and I'd love to know what they're thinking it might mean.
Shall I pick up again? Black feminism in general, and the Combahee River Collective in particular, are consistent touchstones in recent Buddhist feminist scholarship. Integrating Buddhist accounts of interdependent, co-arising, and Combahee's analysis of interlocking systems, Alexis Shotwell notes that this kind of holistic analysis calls on us to understand that responding to suffering will never be a matter of merely addressing gender issues, because gender issues are always interdependent with many other forms of harm and benefit. A key contribution that Buddhist feminism makes to intersectional theory is its attentiveness to existential anxiety as a powerful but often overlooked driver of the compensatory will to supremacy along multiple axes. Who cites Thai Buddhist Sulak Sivaraska, who notes that quote, the need for power stems from a desire to feel superior in the vain quest to establish a unique self, end quote. The desire to feel superior, named by Sivaraska, provides active fuel to the interlocking systems of white supremacy, male supremacy, class supremacy, and heterosexist supremacy, named by Combahee. Buddhism not only helps target the oft overlooked existential drivers of domination, but it also offers a prophylactic against them. Because of the doctrine of interdependent co-arising, Hu argues, Buddhist thinking does not, and logically cannot, support any claim of inherent superiority of any social group. No individual or group is perfectly autonomous from other individuals and groups. We are all constituted by seeming otherness. To truly see this interdependence would interrupt compensatory projections and fantasies of supremacy. Thinking about that for a moment. To truly see this interdependence would interrupt compensatory projections and fantasies of supremacy. This is why Black Buddhist feminism, Zenju Earthling Manual, elegantly defines spiritual liberation as freedom from projections of superiority and inferiority among sentient beings. Because of Black feminism's centrality in the formation of intersectional theory, recent works by Black Buddhists such as Manuel, Angel Kyoto Williams, Rod Owens, Jasmine Sayedullah, and Rhoda Maggie are integral to an emerging intersectional Buddhism. In her book, Black Buddhists and the Black Radical Tradition, Rima Vesserly-Flad notes that for many Black Buddhist teachers, the interlocking spheres of spiritual and political liberation cannot be separated. For example, in her introduction to the book, Radical Dharma, Angel Kyoto Williams argues that becoming radical means balancing inward-looking liberation and externalized social liberation. For her, a third space, as yet unknown, emerges. It is a radical dharma. Black feminist Buddhists such as Williams have experienced intersecting oppression within Buddhist communities and know firsthand that inward-looking liberation is insufficient for undoing structural injustices. Describing her experience with the Shambhala Meditation Center in New York, Williams notes that there was, quote, a particular strain of upper middle class whiteness that had a feeling of being oppressive, where people turned around and looked at you, and I had a strong feeling that I was not welcome. Just open the door. There you go. There you go. And yet, as a Buddhist, Williams is committed to mind-body practices capable of transforming the will to supremacy and its material effects. In Radical Dharma, she describes the ego as a construct that constantly reinforces itself, building structures and systems of control and developing attitudes and views that maintain its primacy and sense of solidity. Sense of solidity, I lost my spot, so that it can substantiate its validity. In other words, to cope with existential fear and resentment, the basic anxiety named by Trungpa, the human ego regularly seeks to maintain itself by shaping the material world in ways that enable feelings of control and supremacy. As has been argued throughout this book, the ensuing structures develop their own institutional logics that need to be targeted directly with collective power, even if existential fear and resentment play a key role in shaping them. And yet, these structures will receive constant energy flows, and new structures of supremacy will be generated if existential fear and resentment are not transformed. As Katie Lonk, a Black Buddhist and former co-director of the Buddhist Peace Fellowship, observes, even if we could achieve our utopia, there would be questions of birth and old age, and sickness and death that persist. And without cultural and embodied resources for metabolizing these existential matters, they will keep fueling structural oppression. That was a lot. Any thoughts or comments? I can keep going. Intersectional Buddhist feminism is a powerful intellectual practical resource for liberatory social movements in North America and worldwide. Social movements are already turning to mind-body practices to address the effects of dominative systems, such as the trauma and burnout they cause. And yet, it is far less common for movements to name and target the existential fear and resentment that Buddhism aims to transform. This is one important reason for the painful persistence of dominative social relations across multiple axes of power. What I am calling radical mindfulness, and what Williams and her co-authors call radical dharma, is a way to name the vital importance of joining existential change strategies with movements targeting sedimented and oppressive structures. There's that word again. I concur with Williams that this is an underdeveloped third space with the potential to transform social movement praxis. One example that Williams provides is the problem of call-out culture. In Radical Dharma, she asks how we might disrupt this penchant we have for policing each other. The quote, "Something I see a lot," Williams continues, "is a sort of one-upmanship around having all the language right and being on all the fronts, because if you have that all together, it really shows that you're radical," end quote. Like Adrienne Marie Brown and Frances Lee, Williams sees call-out culture, criticism that moves beyond the important work of holding people accountable, and seems to relish in the thrill of punishment as a manifestation of the will to supremacy, a desire to be at the front of the parade. According to Williams, quote, "We have to really allow ourselves to create some space for people not knowing, not understanding, just saying stupid things. I mean, stupid as in ignorant. That's going to happen. And we have to figure out how to create room for that rather than policing each other so that people can actually get into the conversation. If someone is asking, there's a willingness there. Treat that willingness as love and treat it with love." End quote. And oh, that last line is so beautiful. Treat it as love and treat it with love. In this passage, I hear Williams encouraging the centering of basic goodness for those who make mistakes and for those positioned to educate and encourage them into more liberatory outlooks. By centering and seeking to embody the basic goodness that animates all of our lives, we dampen the likelihood of the compensatory will to supremacy that can show up along multiple axes of power, such as race, class, gender, and sexuality, but also the desire to feel superior and punish those who don't deploy the correct political terminology because of educational background or other circumstances. It's important to recall that the Buddha failed to make his original Sangha gender inclusive. He was challenged by Mahaprajapati, causing him to relent. It's fortunate that Mahaprajapati stayed open to the Buddha and his teachings, despite their limitations. The Pali Canon contains poems purportedly written by the first Buddhist women, and some of the verses communicate both the political and existential freedom experienced by renunciates. For example, in one poem, a nun named Mutta explains that she is quite free, well free from 3 crooked things: mortar, pestle, and husband, with his own crooked thing. I am freed from birth and death. By joining the Sangha, thanks to Mahaprajapati's efforts, Mutta was freed from a gender division of labor, from an undesirable husband, and from existential fear. Mutta's experience is testament to the fact that despite his limitations, the Buddha and subsequent Buddhists have gifted the world with powerful liberatory tools, even for those who were originally excluded. One such tool is the concept of Buddha nature, reworked by Trungpa as basic goodness for multi-faith and secular audiences. When embodied, basic goodness has the potential to make social movements more enjoyable places to be. If we as activists can affirm our fleshly existence as basically good, thereby calming feelings of fear and belittlement in the face of finitude, then our movements should be less burdened by compensatory replications of oppression. They should also see a reduction in language policing and one-upmanship, often rooted in subconscious wills to supremacy. By becoming more inclusive, welcoming, and culturally magnetic spaces, movements can increase their capacity to not only transform the structures of power they have long targeted, but also the prevailing patterns of existential fear and resentment that remain culturally hegemonic in the Euro-Americas, providing endless fuel to dominative systems and everyday narcissisms. This is the promise of a radical mindfulness. End of chapter 6. I think there was a lot of academic language in the last couple of pages, but I really loved what he was saying in the home stretch, as it were.
On page 144, I was curious when they taught, it says Radical Dharma, Angel Kyoto Williams. Angel has lowercase a, Kyoto has capital K, and then Williams is lowercase. I don't know, it just seemed odd to me, but very purposeful, so I don't know if anybody knows the reason for that.
There are a couple other names that are all in lowercase, no capitalizations further down. I'm just thinking a lot of people are just exerting their independence.
Yeah, I think
I don't know. I'm just because it's, it was notable. And then when she said Williams was always lowercase, not uppercase. So obviously it's very intentional. I'm just wondering what that's about.
It's how those writers present their names, write their names.
Okay.
Yeah. And I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. Angel Kyoto Williams. I don't know why one is capitalized and not the other two, but yeah, I don't have an answer to that, but that is how they, and Andreen Marie Brown, same thing. Like I have a couple of books. Her name
so does Bell Hooks. So does Bruni Davila. I don't know that it's necessarily the case with all of these people, but some Buddhist people, Buddhist practitioners do it to mimic traditional Buddhist priest signatures, which are very small, so that there's less emphasis on individuals and just a little stamp. So I'm pretty sure that Earthlyn does that for that reason, but I don't know about all. That's one reason, but I'm generally with Karen that people are just like, you know what? I'm going to do me.
Isn't that interesting that it's almost like the opposite of what they're, if what you just said is that they're trying to make themselves small, but in our interpretation, they're making themselves big.
Yeah.
Because it's uncommon.
Pat, as usual, has something useful to say.
Personal stylistic choice tied to her identity in public persona. For Angel Kyoto Williams.
Kyoto, yeah.
Thank you, Kyoto. Thank you. Kat continues. People adopt lowercase styling for several overlapping reasons: personal branding, aesthetic preference, a gesture of humility or anti-ego sentiment, or to challenge conventional norms about names and authority.
Cat
Or all
bringing
of
the
the
heat as
above.
usual.
Yeah.
She said, thanks, co-pilot. That's funny.
Yeah, we're all flying this plane.
Other thoughts, or I'm very
Oh, Copilot, the software.
oh,
It wasn't us.
I
not
know,
you,
that's what I'm
Jackie.
saying. It
No,
was,
no,
it
no.
was.
I said all of us are the co-pilot.
No, I
but-
know. I was like, this is like ChatGPT, co-pilot's the other one. I'm like, there's no flying happening here.
Oh,
Matthew.
I don't know. I took it as a genuine response.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
God.
well, if that was AI, then I take back everything I said. That was all completely hallucinated.
Oh,
But
there
of
is
course,
flying
Well,
happening.
there is flying
Okay.
I
happening.
think it's all up in the air.
Oh, very
Ha
good.
Oh,
Nice
nice flying
catch, Karen.
reference,
Boom.
Karen.
Yeah, nicely done. Nicely done.
We need
I
some.
sort of appreciate that, uh, again, in our let's say white Western dominant culture, trying to be specific and not too much generalizing, but the way we sort of enthrone other cultures or traditions. And so I kind of like the reminder that, oh, and even in Buddhism, they're fighting about stuff and having disagreements and trying to do better. So, there's that feels aspirational in a way that, yeah, we're all in the struggle. And you got your highlighter out.
Always. More of a pencil.
And her needle.
Yes.
Yeah.
Gotta finish this
I-
thing.
I used to go to an ashram in Monroe, New York, and Joan, I'm thinking of Joan. Does anyone know Joan? I can't remember her last name, but she was always
Yeah.
talking about what?
No, I was thinking Halifax, but she's in Santa Fe, not New York.
Yeah, she's well known, and she was always talking about how there was all this infighting in the ashram. Everybody was trying to be peace and love, and there was, all this backstory of, and it just seems to be the way, right? Everybody's putting on this like, oh my God, I'm so holy, I'm so Zen, and then not so much.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. That there's in lots of ways, again, that makes it feel accessible to me. So, yeah. And I'm quite intrigued, not necessarily sold, and I've encountered the belief before, but the idea as women as bearers of life, also then being sort of the dark mother figure, the having the power of death. And without getting into a true, not true, I'm intrigued by the idea that, oh, is this some of where the suppression of women comes in, because again of our fear of death and imagining that of the two genders, women have that power. Yeah, I notice in myself, I want to do more reading on that, more learning.
Letter Schlein, Sex, Time, and Power is about that. I can burden anyone's bookshelves about lots of subjects, but that's a worthy one to contend with, I think.
Yeah, I do. The Alphabet versus the Goddess is still one of my top reads in the last 10 years. Well, maybe I'll go ahead and pause the recording there, and we'll pick up next time with the start of chapter 7. So thanks, everybody.
Kat says something here before we